Alex Pereira is widely regarded as the villain in his fights with Isreal Adesanya. His mean-mugging, stoic face makes him out to be one of the scariest men on earth. Alex is often referred to as the world's biggest op, the most dedicated hater. And although I love these jokes surrounding Pereira, or to get serious for a second, Alex is actually the hero. He's the guy who saved the middleweight division from a loudmouth, trash-talking, overhyped point fighter who fans simply became tired of. At the end of the day, he's just a poor kid from the favelas who saw an opportunity to go from rags to riches, who told himself, if he can do it, I know I can too. So today, I want to ask you, who is the true hero in this story? You probably already know that Adesanya's last ever professional kickboxing fight was against Alex Pereira. But what's most interesting is the contrast between both of their lives, not only following their kickboxing matchups, but before it as well. Alex was born into a life of poverty. He grew up in the favelas of Rio in Brazil. Him and his family were cooped up in a tiny apartment. On some nights, they wouldn't eat. When talking about his childhood, Pereira said, "I was raised in a favela. I had no expectations for my life. I would always wonder if I would be able to buy a motorcycle. But how about a car? Maybe a house? No way. That was too far from a reality for me." By the age of 12, Alex dropped out of school and found himself a job at a tire shop. He was desperate to help him and his family make ends meet. Alex would work 10 hours a day, hauling tires, fixing cars. Instead of playing with kids at school, Pereira hung around adults. This forced him to grow up fast and gave him a sense of responsibility. But it also led him into picking up some bad adult habits, like drinking. Alex's co-workers would drink all throughout the workday. Alex didn't like it at first, but like every other young kid, he was vulnerable and gave into peer pressure. Alex became an alcoholic, not only drinking on the job, but everywhere else. Pereira found himself getting into street fights and bar fights, and I'm guessing he did pretty well because he decided to start training at the age of 21. Kickboxing became Alex's passion. Although he still drank, it allowed for him to put himself to good use outside of work. As an amateur, Pereira racked up 25 wins, all by KO. And Alex recalls the moment he turned pro. He says, "At that moment, I decided I had to stop with drinking. I quit. I went through withdrawal, and it was hard, but I did it. And since then, I've never touched a sip of alcohol. I celebrate with Coca-Cola now." Adesanya grew up wealthy. He was born into an upper-class family in Nigeria. His father was an accountant and his mother a nurse. They even had servants and cooks. At the age of 10, Isreal Adesanya moved with his family to New Zealand, in which he attended a grade school and eventually got into college. Now, Adesanya may have been born with a silver spoon, but he didn't have everything go his way. In high school, Adesanya was bullied and picked on for being different, which is what motivated him to get into martial arts. Now, there's nothing wrong with having an easier upbringing, but the point in comparing their two backgrounds is to ask you, who's the underdog? Who have the odds been stacked against? And now that we're midway through this story, it's time to discuss fighting. So we know that Pereira beat Adesanya twice in kickboxing, once by decision and once by KO. Now, it's time to look at what transpired after those kickboxing bouts, so buckle up. 2017, Adesanya commits to MMA and defeats both Melvin Gillard and Stu Dare. Alex signs to Glory Kickboxing and racks up 4 wins, one of them being over kickboxing legend Simon Marcus, who Alex dominated to become the Glory Kickboxing middleweight champion of the world. February 2018, Adesanya makes his UFC debut against Rob Wilkinson in Perth at UFC 221. A month later, he takes out Marvin Vettori to earn himself his first ever UFC Fight Night main event against veteran Brad Tavares. Their fight took place in June, and Adesanya was able to win a decision. A week and a half later, Alex knocks out Yuri Belgari to earn his second middleweight title defense. And in September, Pereira beats Simon Marcus for a second time, marking his third defense. Fast forward to November, and Adesanya has his first big breakout performance over Derek Brunson at UFC 230. February 2nd, 2019, Adesanya fights Anderson Silva in the main event of UFC 234. The event was originally supposed to be headlined by Robert Whittaker and Kelvin Gastelum, but Whittaker pulled out with a hernia the night before, which opened up the gates for Adesanya. It was this event in which he truly took his stardom to the next level, given the iconic passing of the torch from Silva to Izzy. Adesanya soared into fortune and fame with his performance. He was the new poster boy for the UFC, and months later, he fought Kelvin Gastelum at UFC 236 to become the UFC middleweight interim champion in an all-time classic war. Adesanya was a star. He had proven himself in one of the greatest fights fans had ever seen. A month later, Pereira, still under the radar, knocked out Jason Wilness for his fifth middleweight title defense in Glory. On September 28, 2019, Pereira moves up to light heavyweight and knocks out Donegi Abina to become the interim light heavyweight champion for Glory. And on November 5th, 2019, Adesanya knocks out Robert Whittaker in front of a sold-out stadium in Australia to become the undisputed middleweight champion. And in December, Pereira moves back down to middleweight and KOs Ertugrul Bayrak to get his sixth title defense at middleweight. 2020, Isreal Adesanya, leading up to his fight with Yoel Romero, gets asked about Alex Pereira in an interview, to which he says,
and I got knocked out, my first and only ever knockout loss. And even the same guy now he watches all my fights, and every time I fight, like clockwork, he'll try and put something out like, I beat this guy. But I've never ever watched any of his fights, ever. At the end of the day, no one knows who the he is, and he's gonna be that guy when I'm world champion, when I'm a legend. He's gonna be at some pub, talking some shit about, I beat that guy one time, trying to get a dick sucked from a crack whore or some shit.
No one knows who the fuck he is, and he's gonna be that guy at some pub, talking some shit saying, I beat that guy one time, trying to get his dick sucked from a crack whore. This is ironic, considering Alex was a dominant champion in Glory at the time. But there's a harsh reality here for a guy like Alex. Outside of hardcore kickboxing fans, in which there aren't many, no one really knew who he was, other than being a familiar face on a knockout reel played by curious UFC fans wanting to see the only time Izzy had been knocked out. Adesanya was making bank, becoming more and more famous, selling out massive stadiums, living a flashy lifestyle. And Pereira is over here in Glory, still fighting for 50K, struggling just to get by. And here's where Adesanya's career takes a bit of a left turn. In March, Adesanya fights Yoel Romero and puts on one of the worst performances in UFC history. Not only arguably losing to Yoel, but having one of the most boring fights we've ever seen. The fans weren't happy. Adesanya was able to redeem himself a few months later when he dismantled Paulo Costa on Fight Island, making for one of his best performances ever. Izzy reminded the fans of how good he was, and he was once again a hyped up superstar. This was the pinnacle of Adesanya's career. At this point, he looked unstoppable. Alex plowed on with kickboxing, and despite reaching the highest level, he continued to struggle, making pennies in a promotion that just wasn't relevant. While Adesanya went on world tours and graced the covers of video games and magazines, Pereira struggled to make ends meet. Now, imagine if you were Alex Pereira. You've beat this guy 2 times, and you have a reason to think that you're better than him. But he's rich, famous, and you're not. He's regarded as the best striker on earth, but you're not, even though you're at the pinnacle of a pure striking sport. So ask yourself, if he can do it, why can't I? If he can be a millionaire, I know I can become one too. And once you believe, the rest is history. In December of 2020, Pereira makes his professional MMA debut and wins with a brutal knockout in the first round. January 2021. Before making a complete switch to MMA, Alex goes back to glory and fights Artem Vakitov to become the undisputed light heavyweight champion, securing his second belt and making history as a double champ. In March, Adesanya moves up to light heavyweight, but gets beat and outclassed by the recently crowned underdog champ, Jan Blachowicz, who not only won every round, but outstruck him as well. 3 months later, Adesanya fights Marvin Vettori in a rematch, and he won convincingly. But at what cost? It was a snooze fest and put many fans, including myself, to sleep. In November, at UFC 268, Alex makes his UFC debut and knocks out Andreas Michailidis with a statement. February 2022, Adesanya takes on an improved Robert Whittaker, who had gone on a tear through the middleweight division since his loss to Izzy. He was riding a 3-fight win streak and made Adesanya look subpar once again. It was razor close, and I, including many other fans, scored this fight to Whittaker. And this is where the frustration picked up. Not only did Adesanya have another lackluster performance, but many people believed he won because of a robbery. The fans were getting tired of him, and he wasn't wowing anyone anymore. He wasn't inspiring us. He was going through the motions, not fighting to win, but doing everything in his power not to lose. In March, Alex takes on Bruno Silva. This one was a war, ultimately won by Alex, who by the third round looked moments away from finding a finish. And now with 2 fights in the UFC, Pereira was making waves. July 2022. This is an important month. Adesanya and Pereira are now fighting on the same card. Adesanya booked to fight Jared Cannonier. Alex booked to fight the wild man, Sean Strickland. This was the first time these two had been in the same room together following Pereira's knockout over Adesanya in 2017. It was clear that Alex Pereira had Adesanya shook. After all, the man who broke down his door and tore through his roof and put his lights out in their last outing, Poatan, at the doorstep. This wasn't a man at a bar talking shit, trying to cope with feeling sorry for himself, riding on a win from many years ago. This was a man who made it out the mud, from poverty, who had fought off alcoholism to become a champion. A man that knew he could beat the UFC's poster boy, who told himself, if he can make it to the top of the mountain, I know I can do it too. On the night of the fights, Alex Pereira knocks out Sean Strickland in devastating fashion in the first round. Adesanya, yet again, scraped by his opponent in a snooze fest, and it put me and many other fans to sleep. The world was tired of Adesanya's shit. His brash personality was getting annoying, always telling fans that he was going to fuck him up just to stand and leg kick at range for 25 minutes. A bit of a disappointment. Pereira was our new hope, our chance to see an underdog knock off the tiresome king that was no longer entertaining fans. Not only was Alex a man who had beaten him twice, but he had the power to do it with one shot, which was exactly the kind of fashion UFC fans around the world wanted to see the belt change hands. Poatan was coming. For the first time since his loss to Jan Blachowicz, Adesanya had to fight a man that was his size. He couldn't hide behind his reach advantage anymore, or his height. No matter who you picked to win this matchup, one thing was for sure. You knew that this was going to be a show. No leg kicks at range for 5 rounds. No 2 jabs per round. This time, Adesanya would have to go toe-to-toe with one of the scariest kickboxers of all time. After years of staying under the radar, Alex managed to work his way up to the top of a different sport. But why? Was it to take something from Adesanya? A display of pettiness, a bully, a hater? Or was it a man that believed in himself and had good reason too? Alex Pereira may look like a mountain of a man, but his journey is one of an underdog. He was always the B-side. Against the odds, Alex knocked Adesanya out again, this time with the whole world watching, accomplishing his dreams that he worked tirelessly for the past decade, and finally, after 10 years of pennies, he finds himself with an opportunity to make millions. These two will fight for the 4th time this April in 2023. Who will you be rooting for? The trash talker who's already had it all, or the kid from the favelas? Because if there's one thing that I know, it's that Alex Pereira, he's no villain in this story. Alex is the hero.